This is Coder Radio, episode 20, for October 22nd, 2012. Hi everyone, you're listening to Coder Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show, taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, Michael Dominic. Hey there, Michael.
God save the Queen.
Good morning to you, sir.
Good
Fired
morning,
up, huh?
gentles. How are you? Merry old England, 5 p.m.
You wish. We were actually on the pre-show talking about, if we ever do the show in the evening, we're going to have a beer, kick back, and take it slow. But this week, that is not the week for that kind of shenanigans, is it, sir?
It is not, no.
We might, if the clouds and stars align, we should have a special guest join us a little later in the show.
Indeed, he just tweeted me, and Notification Center is telling me that he's restarting his PC.
Oh.
First mistake on his part.
Okay.
So he will be here shortly, but let me do the intro. We're talking about starting up.
Yeah.
So basically, a lot of you have written in saying you want to release a product, a service, a mechanical ninja that hunts down your enemies, whatever.
Finally.
I hope it's steampunk, too. I hope it's got, something like that in there.
And it needs blue LEDs. Just heads up.
And I think the eyes need to be red LEDs so they glow. So it really intimidates your enemies.
And if you don't ship it with Wi-Fi, don't talk to me.
Actually, don't. Okay, you can do Wi-Fi. I need you to encrypt your network, though.
Better watch TechSnap.
And please no Bluetooth, because it's just not secure.
Or
It's
NFC.
never gonna-
No NFC either.
No NFC either. In fact, you know what? Run an Ethernet cable out its back. Forget about Wi-Fi.
There you go. Ethernet can run for a while.
Yeah, it's got 20-foot range.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're talking about starting up. This is going out on your own, releasing your own product as a business, as Chris has, and I haven't, and our special guest, Ben Morse of the Port Forward podcast and a startup called Join Me has. We're going to talk about the trials, the tribulations, the disturbances in the force you're likely to feel. But as always, we're going to start with the feedback.
Let's do it. We've got so many good emails this week.
We got a lot, so I did have to do my Tang concentrate magic.
Oh, yeah. Cherry pick.
So Mihaela, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, writes in to share her love of Delphi,
No.
and also recommend that I take a look at C++ Builder and DevExpress. DevExpress is set on add-ons for Windows GUI development if I was interested in porting code journals to other platforms.
Oh, okay.
More importantly, she likes Delphi.
What do you think of that? I think that's probably the first email we've gotten where somebody said, I love Delphi.
That is the first email, and she makes some good points about properties. It was a very long email. I'm not going to go into too much details, but it's very interesting. We have a wide range of developers. In fact, I also wanted to recommend DevExpress to people. I don't personally use it, but if you're doing GUI work in Windows and you need to save some time, you need to cut down that budget. They're a little pricey, but they will save you hours.
Mm.
So definitely take a look at that. And they also sponsor podcasts, Chris.
Ooh, I like that. That means they're actually in tune with the community.
They're meditating on the community.
Ooh, wow. I hope they don't hurt them.
You never know.
Yeah.
So Bill wrote in to share some Ubuntu-related information. Now, I can't substantiate this at all, basically because I didn't have time. But apparently Ubuntu charges for some sort of API, apps.ubuntu.com. Chris, do you know anything about this?
I don't know anything about that aspect of it.
Right. Because I wasn't... They're also stopping development on something called Ubuntu Tweak, which is apparently related.
Now, my understanding with the Ubuntu Tweak stuff is that, first of all, the developer is back on. So Development's going to continue with Ubuntu Tweak. Now, so the guy who creates Ubuntu Tweak, English is not his native language, and so it's a little hard to parse what's going on.
Okay.
But it sounds like actually what kind of got him down was that he runs a lot of server-side components to the Ubuntu Tweak program and just managing and scaling that server stuff, because he said that He says here, with the release of Ubuntu Tweak, it makes me feel a lot of pressure. The high network traffic made the server almost out of bandwidth. The project gives me more pressure than happiness. I found there's a lot of work to do. Optimize the server side, optimize the client side, add support to do more tests for Ubuntu 12.10, more work than I wrote for even just the last release. It just keeps getting to be a bigger and bigger project. So he's kind of suffering from user adoption, actually. It's the best worst problem to have, right? Is he can't scale it, and it's taking more work and it doesn't generate revenue, so it's kind of a tough spot. But he got such an outpour and so much support and people willing to volunteer to help him that it looks like he's going to keep doing it.
Yeah, I only included this because I wasn't aware that Ubuntu had any sort of, like, I knew Tweak was some sort of app, but I didn't know about the API.Ubuntu.
That is, I'm unfamiliar with that.
Yeah, so Bill, if you can write in next week and give a little more detail, because I think it's something that would definitely be of interest to the community.
Yeah, and this guy, it's not a canonical sanctioned thing, but it is a neat program, and it's interesting because a lot of people thought maybe this was related to Ubuntu sort of changing some of their development practices, but
yeah, and to be fair to Bill, in my condensation of all these long emails, sometimes I misunderstand something. So if I'm mistaken, if these two things aren't related, or if I've misrepresented your point, again, email in next week, and I'll clarify it.
coderradio@jupiterbroadcasting.com.
That's right. So Brian writes in asking that we cover software licenses.
Okay.
In fact, we've done that twice. We've not devoted a whole show, and I don't remember the episodes, but we very quickly jumped into why you wouldn't use certain types of licenses in certain types of projects. So I would recommend that you listen to the back catalog because it is there.
And I would expect it comes up again because it's such a.
It may be a larger topic for another day, but we did do the, let's say, a Spark Notes version.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
All right. So do you want me to read Tim's email?
Go for it.
All right. Well, so Tim wrote in with a question that never even occurred to me that somebody might ask. I don't know why I just assumed everybody knew, but here goes. Hi, guys, and greetings from Australia. Man, I wish I had a good Australian accent, but I don't. I listen to all the Jupiter Broadcasting shows, and I have been for around 6 months, and I particularly enjoy Coder Radio, as I have a love of stringing code together to solve a problem, and I work as a software engineer for a large company in the in-house, specifically with data warehousing. The show provides a great insight for me into the greater development community, of which I am just a small part. Unfortunately, much of my development is now outside of my work, and it's a hobby. I've heard mentioned in previous shows that you do both mainly do contract work, and I would like to know if either of you have ever worked a day job, not contracting previously. If so, how do they compare in your opinion? I ask because I'm getting sick of my current job, and I've been here for a bit over 3 years now, and it's been my first job out of school. I've learned a huge amount, but find myself getting more and more disenfranchised with internal politics, changing directions, and the like. I recently met with ex-colleagues who said I should try contracting, and I like the idea a lot. It seems to me I can work more agile, and people use this excuse whenever they like, but at the moment, the project I'm on deploys straight to production from development. What are your thoughts on the use of term of agile to just use to describe shortcut of traditional development life cycles? Anyhow, keep up the great work. I look forward to the next episode. Well, thank you very much, Tim.
Right. So on the, I'll answer the agile thing first. That's the same as using the term chair to define a bed. So they're just using the wrong word. I mean,
this happens all the time in business, right? They hear a trendy term and they just tweak it to apply what it means to them internally.
Like the new one I keep hearing is responsive design. These are meaningless terms, right? Like HTML5 is virtually meaningless.
Right, yeah. It's more of a concept. Well, at least, when you say responsive design, I think of, a website that changes its layout depending on the device.
Yeah, that's a little firmer, but agile has become...
Yeah, it's been abused.
And they're just using the wrong word. It's nothing bigger than that.
So, the full-time versus always contracting question.
Yeah, I'll go first, I guess. I did have a full-time job. I worked at a startup in Manhattan.
Wow, your first job was a startup?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So you trade problems for different problems. In the startup space, the hours are kind of crazy. You're expected to work from home, in addition to working at the office. There's a lot of pressure in a startup. and sometimes things don't work out, right? So startups always looking for its next round of funding. However, going into contracting, you have other pressures. You're responsible for invoicing clients, and you're also a collection agent.
Oh yeah,
Sometimes people don't pay on time.
yeah.
Sometimes it causes problems.
People never pay on time.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'd like to say they do, but they don't. The other thing is there's no accounting. If you're working, say you're used to working in a development studio, there's no project manager. There's no accounting department. There's nothing really. There's no secretary, there's no office manager, no assistant, nothing. So all those little, what you would think is, little Excel tasks will actually take a good part of your time. You won't bill out 8 hours a day unless you're working a 12-hour day. And
Oh God, that's so true.
that's just the fact.
Yeah,
And so my solution for a while was to work a 12-hour day, but I started burning out. So now I've
yeah.
cut back.
Yep.
You're also going to be responsible for paying taxes.
Ugh.
And you may be surprised about how high, depending on your country, at least in the United States, they have something called self-employment tax, which is essentially a punishment. At least in New Jersey, it
How
is.
dare you go out on your own?
Basically, it's a punishment for working for yourself. So you have to, which means you'll have to open a corporation to shield yourself. But then you'll have to pay corporate income taxes too.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of business things you're going to have to learn. If you're not really a negotiator, you're going to get eaten alive in contract negotiations, and you're also going to have to learn some contract law. You're going to have to hire a lawyer, and you're going to have to be willing to walk away from projects.
I think what you're kind of hinting at here, but so the what all of this
Right.
fundamentally means is you have to be really comfortable with the concept of making leaps into areas that it's completely up to you to figure out, and there's no one there to help you, and you've just got to push through it. And the nice thing that a day job provides is a certain sort of safety net. You generally know that paycheck's coming, although anybody can be laid off, and that kind of stuff is taken care of for you largely, and you can focus on, depending on your job, you can just focus on, when you're done working there, you can focus more on your life.
I mean, one thing I'll say, when I left my job after contracting for about 6 months, I started to understand the crazy founder CEO mentality, like the constant stress,
Mm-hmm.
there's always, on, daily WTF, even on XKCD, there's always the crazy PM or the crazy founder. Those guys are crazy, or those gals are crazy because they have a lot of skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't produce, they don't pay their rent. And when you're on your own, that's the situation. Or if you structure a contract poorly, you don't pay your rent.
And I think where Tim's at is he's probably like, God, I'd love for it if, see, where I got to the point where, because I did too. I worked, I started first working for a school district for a few years. Then I moved into banking, which was about as corporate as you got. If I wanted to change drivers, I had to submit change requests.
Right.
And then from that, I went into banking security, which was even more locked down. And then I burned out, and I hadn't quite identified what the problem was yet. So I just moved into another corporate job thinking it was just, go over here. And then I just found I kept moving from corporate job to corporate job. And then that's when I switched to contracting.
Yeah, I mean, actually, this episode is going to be of interest to Tim. I mean, Ben is more a product-focused guy, but, all startups are the same business, right? I mean, you have the same amount of risk.
I think a day job's actually riskier than people think it is.
Oh yeah, you could be, especially. I mean, I don't know what kind of company he works for, but layoffs are a reality these days.
Oh yeah.
So
and you don't have any control over it, where you do when you're a contractor. But the flip side is it's all on your shoulders.
Right.
And you know what? It's also not a permanent thing. Try it, Tim. See what happens. Listen to the rest of this episode and then decide.
Yeah, give it a go. I mean, one thing I'll say is if you're in the United States, you cannot do it without a corporation or an LLC, because the legal liability would make you cry.
Yeah.
If things go wrong, you need to shield yourself.
But I've been in his shoes before, so I know where he's at.
The Mambo King in the chat's right. They call it a corporate shield for a reason. Because, I hate to say it, but once a year something's going to go bad. You have someone who doesn't pay on time. You're going to have someone who you do the project and the guy disappears.
That's pretty good if it's once a year.
All right, well, you have worse luck than me, but
yeah, I think I do.
It happens, and you're going to have to actually budget in for that. You're going to have to, you have to think of all the bad things because it's all going to come down on you. Wow,
Hmm.
what a great way to start today's topic.
It's just we're just being honest with people.
Yeah, it is the reality though. I mean, again, in this economy, especially where I come from, the startup world, layoffs are more than likely.
I got my see when I worked for the bank, I got outsourced, and
Yeah,
and I thought, this could happen to me at any time, at any point, and if I'm going to screw up and go bankrupt, it might as well be my fault. And that was the final thing. It's like, yeah, all this other stuff is really scary and risky, but so is just being completely ignorantly and blissfully unaware of what's going to happen to me next. Maybe it's because I'm a bit of a control freak, I guess. I don't know.
well, I think you have a point, right? So there is, I would say I have friends who work as software developers, as employees in development studios, and their managers are fully aware of the situation, and they're leveraging more unpaid overtime out of them.
Yeah, I
So
think, yeah,
it there's a trade-off, right? As a contractor, you can bill for every hour you're working,
right.
except for the ones that are, biz dev, which
Mm-hmm.
are a lot.
Mm-hmm. And you can, hopefully, if you're lucky, you can take on more clients. If gosh, we have some expenses coming up, I need to generate more revenue for a little while. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what's allowed me to see that kind of freedom and flexibility is what's allowing me to sit in this chair right now and do this show, because I know that tomorrow I'm going to work my ball sack off to make up for lost revenue today. And that's just, I have that kind of flexibility.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing you're gonna have to do. The other thing is there's no such thing as a paid sick day anymore.
Oh gosh, sure,
There's
yeah, yeah.
no paid holidays. It's Christmas. That's fine. You better have revenue, cash to make up for not working.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really all right. Let's get off this because this is kind of turning into Tim, stay at your job. But I don't think you should. I think the only thing is listen to last week's show. Price yourself assuming you're going to give the government 30 to 35% of your revenue.
Right.
Because one of the big traps is you price yourself at whatever your salary hourly rate turns to, and that's not right. There's a reason consultants charge a lot. It's because they're handing a lot of it over to the government, and that's true in any country. And I'm told it's worse in Europe, but I don't know how things work there.
Should we shift gears to Cole's email?
Yep. So Cole writes in. Now he is a lifelong Windows guy. Then he became a Linux guy, and now he's doing some iOS development on Macintosh. So he's liking Objective C, and he's wondering how he can make up for quote the sin of Mac.
Whoa,
Rather biblical of him.
got some guilt there.
Got some Catholic guilt. I'm Catholic. Don't be offended. Um, well, I have bad news for you. Open source Objective C is in a piss poor state. As much as you might want to say that, GNU Step is a viable alternative, GNU Step is garbage. They're not really actively working on it. It doesn't compare to Apple's tools, and it's just, Objective C, though it's a great language, isn't seen in a good light outside of the Apple community. So if you really like Objective C, you're probably going to have to stay on Mac and iOS. Yes, it's true it can compile in GCC or LLVM on any system, but without Cocoa, it's really not that great.
Hmm.
So I mean, you can go ahead and look at GNU Step. That's the best alternative, but it's
If you want to.
it's light years behind what you're used to.
Yeah, yeah.
And the community there's a few people in there who are still trying, but they're in desperate straits. Because they're trying to target Linux, and the rest of the Linux community kind of lulls them out of the room.
They're like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks.
You get that crap out of here. Like
Yeah.
I mean, just trying to install the tool chain is a nightmare.
Hmm.
So I'm sorry.
Just go, move along. Don't do that, Cole. Don't do it. Don't do that.
Yeah, you're better off just either. I would say if you want to write Objective C, stick on iOS or Mac.
Yeah.
Someone also asked about Cole also asked about what tools are used for design in the iOS community.
Okay.
Well, there's a big overlap, right? Because most web designers already use Photoshop on Macs. So it's basically Photoshop.
All right. So Photoshop is the go-to tool, huh?
For designers, yeah. Having said that, the bar on design is so high, you're unlikely to be able to do your own design.
Now, if somebody like Cole, Michael, had a great idea or wanted to dispute with your drastic opinion on the open source state of Objective-C, how should they get a hold of us?
You can get a hold of us at coderradio at jupiterbroadcasting.com.
It's amazing, right? That's exactly. Or we have the contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting site.
We do.
And you can fill that out too. Now, before we go on, do you want to tell me about something that you're kind of a fan of?
I love me some CodeJournal.
What? How can this be?
I would like to point something out. CodeJournal is the first Mac App Store app, or actually Macintosh, to my knowledge, that ties into GitHub and gives you notifications of your GitHub activity. It's also the best.
The best. The best.
It is the best value for your money. You get not just notifications. You get gist editing, gist creation. You can reply back to comments on your open issues or your closed issues, or you control people when they try and send you pull requests. I do it. Why not? It's fun for the whole family. In fact, I have a 5-year-old brother. I put him at the keyboard when someone sends me pull requests, and he just hammers away.
There you go.
So go pick it up.
Sounds like I could put Dylan to see. Now I'm going to get Dylan using CodeJournal.
That's right. Just I'm sorry, your parentheses are wrong, so we're not taking that. Now, Dylan can just slam the keyboard in rage.
For App Store users, there's a little bit of good news, right?
Finally, after 10,000 years, I'm free. CodeJournal just got the 0.3 update.
But it's not free. The app. You're free, but the app's not free.
I'm free, but the app is still the same price. But if you bought it before, you get the update for nothing.
That's magic, man.
Unfortunately, there is another version finished.
Well, that just means there's more good stuff coming.
That's currently in testing. So App Store users, you're once again going to be a little behind, but that's okay. And it does have an awesome new icon by Tobias from the JB community. I hope he doesn't care if I say his name.
That is a rad icon, I gotta say. I really like that icon. It also
has the design stylings of Cheesy Bacon from the community. It's just like a JB app, baby.
That is really cool. That is awesome. All right, now we've got our special guest on the line. Before we go, though, I just want to remind folks that with the holiday season coming up, if you want to support this network, now would be the excellent time to load the Jupiter Broadcasting extension, which you can find at the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com, along with our direct affiliate links if you don't want to use an extension for Amazon and Newegg and Netflix and ThinkGeek and Best Buy, all great places to get your holiday gifts. But thank you to everyone who loads those extensions on their machines. And we're hoping that as people buy their holiday gifts, they'll think of Jupiter Broadcasting and support the network. All right, sure. Mr. Dominic, well, guess what? We have our special guest on the line.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hey, Ben. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no. Thank you for joining us. Michael, I'll let you do the introductions.
So this is a guy I found on the street in Penn Station.
Yeah, I was just sleeping there. Yeah, it was good.
He asked me for some change. I'm like, nah, how about you be on a podcast?
And so he decided to bring me on, and I am coming to you guys today to talk about startup life. I actually am the founder of my own startup. It's called Join Me. We have an app out for iPhone, and we're coming to Android in about 2 weeks. We're an app that makes it easier for you to find things to do and friends to do them with. Oh. Basically, our mission is to try to make it easier for you to be an active person. You know, be healthy, get off your butt, get out, connect with people. Now, I could talk about my startup for days, and I could turn this podcast into just me talking about my startup and how awesome it is. But what I'd like to remove, the branding from this podcast and just tell you guys about some of the key things that go on in the startup life and, the challenges I've faced as a founder, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, awesome, Ben.
Okay, now, Ben, you're a podcaster yourself, though, right?
Yeah. So I actually have my own podcast. It's called the Port Forward podcast. I have been a little bit derelict in my ability, or responsibilities in recording these episodes because I have a full-time startup, and I have employees, and I have things to deal with. But thank you for reminding me about my own podcast because I would like to say, I would like to bow down to Chris a little bit here. I'm a little bit of a Chris fanboy, as Michael Dominic pointed out. I listen to all of your shows, at least one episode or 2 episodes of every single show you've done. I have the all RSS feed on my iPhone.
Good man.
Actually, your podcast made my podcast possible because all of my listeners came from the one TechSnap episode when you interviewed me very early in TechSnap. I actually bought a Boxy because you bought a Boxy. I think I even friended you on the Boxy network. So
right
I'm a big fan.
You still use it? I like the Boxy quite a bit still.
I love my Boxy. It's an amazing tool.
Well, Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for making this possible. I hope I don't want to mess with your format, but I'd actually like to move the book pick forward to right now, if that's okay with you guys.
Go for it.
So the book pick for this week is called The Lean Startup. It's written by Eric Ries. It's a great sort of portrayal of startup life and different techniques and technologies and choices you need to make in the startup world. I really recommend that if you are doing your own business or writing any sort of software, you check out this book. I'm going to cover a couple principles here to sort of get us started on the conversation. So one of the main things about the startup world and the lean startup is this concept of an MVP. And you guys have probably heard of minimum viable product before, right? Both of you guys?
Yes.
So they define MVP in a very interesting way. He talks about the MVP as the minimum amount to learn. So whatever you think your product is, chop it in half, chop it in an eighth, and if you can release it and still learn about your customers, about your users, then that is your MVP. And that's what we did at Join Me. We released an iPhone app. It doesn't have all the features we'd like, but it connects to Twitter, connects to Facebook. It has the basic functionality. There's a map, etc. And we launched. And that really helped us learn. Like we've learned so much. We don't have a million users, but we learned a lot by sort of just putting ourselves out there. And one of the things about building software is you could build the nicest feature. You could put the nicest polish on it or whatever you wanted. And if no one uses it, right, you wasted 6 months of your life for nothing. I'm sure Michael has experience with this.
Yes, I've built many, many products that don't do well. Now, I'm curious. Can I interrupt you? I'm probably going to interrogate you throughout your
That's
points.
fine. Sure.
So one issue I had with CodeJournal was finding what is the minimum viable product. Where do you stop and just say, okay, this is 1.0, I'm done?
Well,
Or not
according to
done,
the
but-
book, right, anything that
Right.
would submit to the App Store and be downloadable is your MVP. Because you
Okay.
can learn, right? I mean, I'm
Right.
not saying you should go to the absolute extreme, right? But I mean, that's an option.
Okay. So isn't there a concern of a poor reception?
Right. I mean, definitely there is a poor reception, but you always have these quote unquote early adopters. And for
Right.
you, I would assume that a lot of your early adopters are coming from the Chris Fisher audience here. Because
Chris
people.
himself bought 10 copies.
Oh, I bought 2 copies. Well,
Yes.
I bought the first copy, and Michael actually rejected my purchase, saying, "Oh no, it's not right," or "Oh no, you don't have the right operating system." And I had to buy it again just to prove him that I was wanting to support him.
He's a very dedicated CodeJournal user, which is awesome.
Good man.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so the next point you talk about a leap of faith. Now, I haven't heard this before, to be honest with you.
So basically, when you have a great idea like CodeJournal, right, you need
Right.
to make assumptions because you have not gotten your MVP, right? You don't have any software out there. So you have to assume that your users want to do this or that your users want to do that. And so by incorporating or by doing your own, venture, you're taking a leap of faith that your assumptions are correct, right? Now, as soon as you get your MVP, you begin what's called the build, measure, learn feedback. So you build a tiny feature, you measure, your analytics, et cetera, and then you learn from what you were measuring, and then you repeat. And before you can get into this loop, right, you have to make assumptions to sort of get the loop started. And the idea is you want to get through the build, measure, learn loop as many times as possible, as fast as possible, because that helps you iterate, that helps you stay light on your feet, that helps you, change with the market. Let's say there's a new social network like Google Plus comes out. Well, should you integrate with it, et cetera, et cetera?
Now, having said that, there still is no right API for Google Plus. I say this, Ben, because I'm going to get 20 emails asking about it.
Well, there's a beta, and we looked into it, and we decided it wasn't part of our MVP.
Right.
But so beyond leap of faith assumptions, you need to make assumptions. Every time you build something, you're making additional assumptions, and the Lean Startup really encourages you to write these down and to talk about them as an assumption. So I assume CodeJournal users will have enterprise servers, right? Or you can ask them, right? Or
That's actually something I assumed they wouldn't have that I had to add later. But
okay, right? So that was an assumption, right? And you learned, and then you iterated. So that would be a good move on your point there. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of things that we made assumptions that people with Join Me, you can sign on, using your Facebook credentials or using your Twitter credentials, but also you can sign on using your email.
Sure.
And a lot of people, so we looked at our competitors before we launched, and a lot of people would complain on their App Store reviews, this sucks, you can only sign on via Facebook, blah, blah, blah. So we were like, okay, well, we're going to add sort of an email password sign on. And that turned out to be popular. However, Twitter turned out to be very unpopular, which is very concerning to us. Of course, we want to work on that.
Right.
But Twitter users don't seem to be that interested in our app.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I mean, this all sounds well and good, right? But let me be devil's advocate just a little here. I could sit at the whiteboard stage with a project and make lots of assumptions. How do you actually pare down what assumptions are, let's say, reasonable, given you have no product yet, no
Mm.
you have
Right.
I'm assuming, Ben, and I could be wrong, you didn't do any kind of like field testing or surveys or anything like that, right?
No, but my
No.
co-founder actually was involved in this space, and he had been doing research in this space,
Okay.
sort of on the VC side, which we can talk about funding if you'd like. So we had a lot of experience with people's past failures and things like that. But as far as assumption, yeah, go ahead.
So you did have some kind of base of data to go
Yeah,
off of. You did actually do some okay.
it was more, word of mouth or empirical, as
Right.
opposed, on paper. But yeah.
Okay, and then you mentioned, I'm sorry, go Chris.
Oh, I don't mean to backtrack, but I just kind of I find it interesting that, Ben, you mentioned you looked at Google Plus and you said there was a beta and it might have been viable, but when you were looking at the features and what you wanted to ship with and what you didn't, you said no, we're not doing Google Plus. And I'm just curious, not specifically about Google Plus, but what was the qualifier for that? We don't need to focus on that right now.
We were so again MVP, right? We're trying to shoot for our MVP. What can we get out to the App Store as fast as possible? But Google Plus is in a beta state, and so if we were to break the bank or build our entire product around a beta API, that might not have been necessarily a good choice. That being said, we believe at Join Me that the circles feature of Google Plus would play very well into sort of Join Me. Like, I want to invite this circle to go play frisbee, or I want to go paintballing with this circle.
See, that's exactly what I was thinking. That's why I was kind of
Right.
curious. So you did consider that. So it's just something that maybe will be a down the road type thing, and you just iterate and release when that's
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Okay, so you have a point here, which I actually do find incredibly curious. So, Ben, I know me and you have talked, and I think you listen to the show, or I know you do.
Yeah.
You know how I feel about equity.
I do know how you feel equity, and I feel the opposite of about you about equity.
Right, so make the case.
Okay, so there's another book which I won't make the pick of the week, but it's called The 4-Hour Workweek, and it talks about sort of the two ways of making money in the world. The first way would be a normal job, so you show up to work, they pay you money, you leave, and that is sort of talked about as trading your time for money. And the second way to make money is passive income. So either it's an investment or it's an app in the App Store that's making money while you don't actually have to work. And that is really the kind of money that you want to focus on. That's how the guys get rich, is the passive income. And one of the ways to get to that would be equity. And now Michael has talked a lot about equity and how he hates equity, and how if someone says, we're going to give you equity, you should run away. And I am one of those guys that will tell you, we will give you equity. We are actually in the middle of our fundraising stage right now. We started out with a 50 grand sort of family and friends round, and now we're starting our seed round right now, and we've actually 50 grand into our seed round, which is awesome, because the first 50 or the first 25 is the hardest to get, and then the rest kind of comes along as other investors get interested. But until now, we've built a team from around 9 to 11 people, and we've all done it on equity. And basically the way it works is you say, we're going to give you this much equity. It comes over a vesting schedule, and people get really excited. And the interesting thing about equity is that it's all about a pie, right? It's about how many shares are in the pie. And you have to know that I'm the founder, I can add shares to the pie, and it'll dilute the people that are, let's say I gave you 10 shares of this company, right? Well, if I add 10 more shares or 1,000 more shares to the pie, your piece of pie just got a lot smaller. But it really inspires people to think about what the possibility of the company is. And with us, I mean, we will be paying our employees. It's not like we're just saying, oh, it's equity and then that's it. But we find that people they have skin in the game, so they're more likely to show up to work and be excited, not being on Reddit all day, et cetera.
That was I worked, we had a question earlier from Tim who said, what was the difference between, what's the major difference between contracting and working a day job? And one of my last big day jobs I worked at, they got to the point where they, as just like, okay, well, here's your next round of reviews, and this time not only do we want to give you a raise, but we want to give you some ownership in the company. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, it probably kept me there for another year at least. It sort of changed my whole perspective. Like, I did feel like I had a little more direct to do, because if the company did a little better, I did a little better. And it did change my perspective for a while, but at the end of the day, the way it's structured generally is not super favorable for people like me. I mean, it was more like a nice to have after I got done looking at it.
All right. So Ben, what I would ask is, are you familiar with the recent case of OnLive?
Tell me more about
Oh,
OnLive.
great example.
Basically, OnLive paid low salaries like a lot of startups and gave their employees generous equity options. All well and good, right?
Right, sure.
Then the investors weren't happy, so the investors, and this is an oversimplification, but they basically declared bankruptcy on OnLive Corp, opened a new company named OnLive, but the bankruptcy court allowed them to basically, bankruptcy, you drop off all your debts, so they dropped
Right.
off all the equity to the employees.
Okay. Well, I mean that really sucks.
Right?
And
How do you protect? Is there a way to protect yourself to say, because
you have to look at the company, right? So before I talk about how to protect yourself, I wanted to ask Chris, did they put you on a vesting schedule?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, I believe it did take some time before everything sort of kicked in.
And do you still have those shares? I'm assuming it was a public company, but do you still have those shares in your possession?
I don't believe I do anymore.
Okay,
It was
so
private. It was yeah. I think it wasn't super enticing after a while because it was a private company too.
okay, so
But-
it wasn't public, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the ways to protect yourself is you have to sort of evaluate the situation.
Yeah.
With Join Me, we have less than 15 people. We're very nice guys. We're active. We're young. We're hip. We're not trying to screw you. As opposed to using the F word, I say I'm not going to F word you. We say I'm not going to zuck you because of the Zuckerberg, whole
Ouch.
Facebook thing,
Oh.
right? And so that's sort of something that we really try to uphold around here. And I mean that being said, it's possible for that to happen, and that
Right.
is that. I mean, business is not bad, equity is not bad, but there are cases where it can be used for evil, right?
And I'm not suggesting,
Yeah.
of course, that Join Me would do that. I'm just, there is a risk. In
I mean,
anything.
yeah, you're totally right that there's a risk, and I mean that's the thing is that the equity is a promise. But I mean, the cool thing is that we're based here in Silicon Valley, so we have the whole startup culture. Everybody's really stoked about it. People come here to work in a startup because they want to make it big,
Right.
and the investors are playing the same exact game. They want to put money into young, bright engineers' hands so they can make it big. And I believe there's some story of someone who painted the walls at Facebook, and instead of accepting cash, they gave him some handful of shares, and now he's extremely rich, right? I mean, that's totally cool, right?
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. I wonder though, and I think you actually are planning to touch on this. So if I'm going to make you jump ahead, just stop me right here. But I wonder, Ben, to be completely frank, if I was going to say develop an app and I just wanted to make a lot of money, why are you doing it in San Francisco? Why are you doing it with an actual office and bringing people in? Why aren't you just outsourcing that kind of work and
Okay,
working out of
all
your
right.
house, something like that?
Okay. So, I mean, one of the things about Join Me is that we're trying to build a company, right? I mean, we are really looking to have something for us as, owners, as entrepreneurs. We're trying to build something that's cool, it's a going force, and that, I mean, we're trying to accomplish a mission, right? We are trying to get people active, get off their butts, off the couch, right? And outsourcing kind of so we have done some outsourcing and it works to a means, it's an end to a means, right? It gets you the product, it gets you what you need, but you're not building a team. And when you spend money on outsourcing, almost always you're much better at spending that money in-house, because you're going to know the person's going to be accountable to the code, but also from an investor's point of view, investors look at teams more than look at the product.
Uh-huh.
Because if you think about it, if an investor puts $500,000 into our company, most of that is going to go into salary, right? It's not going to go into technology. Some of it goes into rent, and most of it goes into salary.
Mm-hmm.
So the investors are directly paying salary, so they better hope that the salaries are going to go to someone who's good and worth their time.
Well, and look, isn't it interesting what just happened with Color, right? I think everybody's probably familiar with the app Color that had a huge splash at initial round 40 million, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and then kind of went nowhere. But at the end of the day, everybody, well, at least the investors, still made a piece because they got, what do they call it, acqui-hired, whatever they call that by Apple?
Acqui-hired. Yeah.
Acqui-hired, yeah, they got acqui-hired. So you're right. I mean, because the company had a team and the company had talent, that's essentially assets that they were able to leverage and still make something.
And that's
Now-
really interesting. I'm sorry, if you wouldn't mind. That's really
Go ahead.
interesting because one of the things when you're a part of a startup in the venture capital world, almost one of the most important things is getting to funding, right? Because that allows you to pay the bills, that allows you to continue on. And if you don't even build a product, but you get to funding, right, you can still pay employees, you start creating jobs, you're still an American job creator, and that's still, that's still something done at the end of the day.
Okay, and that's obviously great. I mean, when it works well. Now, this might be something because Ben, I usually get phone calls from investors who've invested in startups, and things don't necessarily go good with the coding.
Okay. Well,
Now, I'm glad that hasn't been your experience.
explain to me a little bit more what you mean by things don't go good with the coding.
Common situation. They have an app idea, right?
Okay.
They have, let's say, two friends or two partners who know how to develop, but they're really back-end developers, and they decide to do client-side development.
Okay.
And it just doesn't hold mustard.
Well, so as an investor, that's your job to look at the guys, ask them their background, and say, "Listen,
Right.
you've never done this before, so why should I give you money?" Or and then the startup should say, "Oh, well, we've invested this $50,000 to hire a UI designer, right?" And then again, the
Right.
investor's taking a gamble because they haven't met that designer, and they're allocating money to go to a salary to someone who they haven't met.
So so you hire people. When you're hiring someone, how do you vet them, right? Because it's really it's the investor's direct money. So I'm assuming there's a lot of care that has to go into hiring anyone for you,
It's
right?
true, and
Right.
but the thing is though is that we're doing equity hires at this point, right? So we have been
Right.
paying we paid a couple stipends, et cetera, but we haven't really paid any sort of salary or cash out, right? So without being able to pay any money, beggars really can't be choosers, and so we have basically opened our doors to anyone that wants to come in, and we basically do a like a 1 month trial period. So we work with them for a month. We get them started on the code. We see what they're like. And most of the time, people will just fall off because they're not interested. So we've probably had, I say around 9 to 12 right now, and we've probably had 20, in total. So with 8 of those people or 10 of those people sort of dropping off, and you
Okay.
can sort of tell if they don't jive with the company culture. Either they're
Sure.
too stuck up, or they're they don't have good communication skills, which is really important. And we're not super picky right now, again, because we can't be choosers, right?
Because you
So
can't. And I actually like that idea of a trial period. I think that's something more companies should adopt, to be
Hmm.
honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Um,
and we don't really sign equity papers until 1 month in. But another thing about equity, which is kind of interesting, is that most equity is on a cliff, and the industry standard is a 4-year cliff. And so the way that works is you get equity every month. So let's say you get 10,000 shares. Over 4 years, you'd get a 48th of that every month, or whatever, however many months are in 4 years. You can do the math on that. You got yourself, guys.
Can I
Uh,
can I ask a
yeah.
clarification point before we go too far from the point you made a little bit ago? So are these people are they coming and working for free?
Well, no, I mean for free, as in no cash.
So how are
Then
they paying the bills in the meantime while they're developing?
so a lot of people that we found either have significant others that are paying the bills, or are living at home or something like that. And for the people that have had come to us and said, "Listen, I need to pay the bills," we've been able to make that happen.
So what's the worst case scenario for them though? If is the worst case scenario for them if there isn't profit generated, that time
Again,
is
see,
lost?
Chris, you're focusing on profit, right? See, we are focusing on investors because we don't really
Ah,
think that Join Me is going to do anything until we have, let's say, 1 million users. We
gotcha.
don't think it's actually going to be able to float. So everything is focused on getting that VC,
Uh huh. Uh
basically.
huh. Right. Right.
right. So actually, I think this is a great point to bring up. Me and Chris both technically have startups, and
Yeah,
Chris is
definitely. Oh,
significant,
for sure.
but the business model is significantly different, right? Like me and Chris operate on cash on hand.
Right.
I would assume, unless you have a epic credit line, Chris. But
Well, I do have that too.
all right, well, I operate on cash. It's a different. And Ben, because I see the chat room. There's a lot of questions about how this works. Ben's model is not new. Ben's model is the Google model, the Yahoo model from back in the day, and people have done very, very well working under that model.
The Apple model. Apple got a lot of initial funding, right?
Apple paid people in stock. Very famously, Robert Cringely refused to be paid in stock. He
Yep.
would be very, very rich right now if he
Yeah.
took the stock. So this is I would, and Ben, you can disagree, but to me, this is a very classic Silicon Valley startup model you're
Yeah,
using.
it's very classic, and it works better in Silicon Valley than if you're other places, in the back east or down south,
Right, right. Because
because there's
actually,
not VC there.
yeah, back east, it's a very interesting point. when I'm with clients who are getting investors, the discussion's not user count, it's what's your revenue model.
Right. And you know what? That's funny because we've been to probably around 10 VCs and they
Right.
say, forget the user model. Don't even worry about it. What
Yeah.
is your user count?
I
Exactly.
think there's a little cultural difference because here in New York, it's very, I would say there are investors, but they're much more traditional or
Yeah,
traditional from other businesses, I would say.
exactly. Yeah.
But I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to clarify that for the
Well,
chat because they were
Chri-
getting a little.
Sure. I just wanted to finish up really quick about the equity and I'll
Yeah.
be done.
Sure.
The point of the cliff is that you don't get any shares for the first year. And then after a year and 1 day, you get all of the shares you would have gotten for that first year. And then beyond the cliff, it just comes in as a monthly trickle. So that is sort of another way of a trial period because if they commit a felony or if something goes down with your employees, in that first year, they don't get anything. And if something goes down, at year 2, they only vest for the first and second year. So it's very much, I guess, protection from for the company at that point,
Right.
I guess. Yeah.
So this must be mostly then younger people, right? That are able to sort of
Yes.
swing this kind of work style.
Yes. But I mean, we are on our way. I mean, we're in the middle of our fund, right? And once we close our fundraising, we'll begin paying salaries and all that stuff. And things are going well, right? It's not like we're going to investors and people are like, "Oh, this is a horrible idea." We just talked to someone else who wants to sign our papers or wants to, take our papers, right? So, I mean, that's a really good sign, and that helps us validate our own idea because if investors are interested in it, right, that must mean that someone is taking interest, right?
Sure.
It's not just some crazy idea that we
Right.
cooked up or
It's
whatever.
sort of validating in a sense. And Michael, I don't mean to go off in the weeds here, but just one thing that made me kind of curious about Ben is, so if I'm understanding correctly, these folks come in and they sort of invest at the ground level to get the project somewhere so that it's presentable to an investor, and then if you get funding. You hire in maybe some higher up engineers who are really going to whip it into shape, take care of more of the back end, or whatever it kind of needs to really be kind of done that you need some almost like the PhD levels to come in at. Now, does that, if I'm understanding that correctly, does that create this immediate division between your development team? Because you've got these guys who've been there almost since day one who've really sort of built the foundation and quote unquote built this thing, and then you've got these other guys who just get to roll in with a salary and they sort of are supposedly going to be the heroes. They're going to whip the thing into shippable shape. Is there a ego clash that happens there, or am I sort of misunderstanding what might happen?
Well, that's a very interesting question because I think that is very possible to happen. However, we haven't gotten there yet, right? So I can't necessarily answer that question 100%. But there is definitely a division. Usually startups count employees like, oh, employee number 1, employee number 2.
Mm-hmm.
And usually as the numbers go down, so does the equity, right? And those salaried employees, now that once we're post-funding, there's a big cliff as far as how much equity you get, right?
Mm-hmm.
People before equity usually get a whole percentage points or more than entire percentage points. But beyond that, you get a lot less. Now that being said, if that were to happen to us, I think we would be very conscious of trying to create a very cohesive, environment. And I don't think that we would try and alienate anybody.
Culture plays a big part here, doesn't it?
Yes, and making a company culture is actually, I've had people come and say, "What's your company culture going to be like? You should work on that." And that kind of blows my mind because I sort of figured that culture would come out organically, but this person was, "Hey, you should go ahead and encourage your culture."
I'm sure. I'm sure you've read the Zappos book that.
Yeah, I've read there's a comic book reduction of that which I took a look at. It's very interesting. Yeah, exactly.
All right, so let's get down to the tech.
Okay, sure. So, Chris, how dare you insult me by saying I don't know the back end? I know all the ends. I know the front end. I know the back end. I know the side.
All right.
I've been developing my entire life, ever since I've been very young, doing PHP, Java servers, Linux, back in high school, I was running servers in my dorm, I've been doing all of the fun stuff. I actually recently, one of my favorite things is to go and compete in hackathons. I actually have won a couple hackathons. I won a terabyte of Dropbox space for free for life.
Whoa, terabyte!
Yeah,
That's
terabyte.
handy. That's usable.
Yeah, kind of usable.
Nice.
Yeah. I also won a trip to Vegas with one of my hacker buddies, which was pretty awesome.
Nice.
And I won like a couple gift cards and a couple other things on the side. So I definitely am that Rockstar programmer. If anyone's going to be coming on, it's going to be the front end, it's going to be the designers, it's going to be the UI guys.
And he's very humble too.
Extremely humble. So as far as technology stack, for Join Me, we are running Amazon EC2, so we're running in the cloud.
Okay.
We're running Ubuntu Linux boxes.
Okay.
And we are actually using a Java stack. I'll just stop right there.
Madness. Okay,
I
what
know.
now? What I'm now? Don't tell me Java EE.
I don't know exactly are you talking about? I don't know what that means.
So you're not using like an Oracle deployment Java EE, right? You're
No, no, no,
using
no,
you said
no.
Ubuntu, so you're using something like Play or Spring or something smaller.
So we're using Spring. So
Okay.
Spring is a framework that runs on Java, and basically provides the ability for it to listen for URL requests and then pass those URL requests into your function. So you can see what the URL was, you can see what the variables were.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and then from there, we build the database layer, and our database is running on MySQL. And we also have some NoSQL. And for all of you listeners out there, Michael is a big hater on NoSQL, and I think that you should not listen to him as much as
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, let me just put it this way, Michael. I want to be very respectful. I think that NoSQL is a big thing. It takes a lot of work to manage, but it can be very beneficial if you use it right. And replacing joins with my NoSQL is absolutely the wrong way to go, as we talked about
Right.
before,
Yeah,
right?
so the discussion is if you're starting fresh, I actually don't hate NoSQL. But I think if you have a traditional Postgres or SQL database, trying to convert your joins into NoSQL is not worth the effort.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Right. Now, you said Java. I'm just want to backtrack just a little. I find that really interesting because more and more I'm seeing people go for the new hotness. Node.js, which I think is crazy because it's not even at 1.0. A lot of Python, a lot of Django, a lot of Ruby. Was Java just a simple? There are more Java developers out there that are cheaper, or was it? Or are you yourself a Java fan?
So actually, Java was sort of serendipitous the way it came into our hands. One of our initial, not investors, but one of our initial advisors,
Okay.
already had sort of a software stack that was. He basically had a project that was. It wasn't similar to our idea, but it was basically a REST API he was building. Um,
Nice.
and so I basically used that, and I retooled it. I rebuilt the database. I rebuilt everything, but I used it as sort of a spring to sort of go off of. And that was sort of how I got started down the Java track. And it probably saved me a couple months of time. Now, that might have been a poor choice if in a year, if I'm now being slowed down because Java is not as good as Python or Ruby or something like that. But that was a decision I had to make at the time just
Right.
so to get to VC, right? So
Yeah, because I'm actually in the middle of a similar decision, and I'm surprised at what technology I'm leaning towards.
The cool thing about Java, I will say, is that Amazon is they are big proponents of Java. So all of their services are accessible through jars, like the Java include
Sure.
file, whatever, right? So there's a Java API for all of the Amazon stuff, which is really helpful for us.
And your
Uh,
code executes. I mean, every Java's fairly quick compared to say Ruby, so it makes a
exactly.
lot of sense for
But
a number of reasons.
a lot of it more than that is really how efficient you are. And when you're using a MySQL database, there's a lot of things that you really should be doing in the database. Any sort of correlation between this data over here and this data over here should be done all in the database. And you should be trying to offload as much work as you can into the database. And if you're not doing that in Java, if you're not doing that in Ruby, it doesn't matter what language you're writing, you're still going to be
Right.
slow because you're not using the technology the way it's supposed to be
Now you
used.
bring up another good point, optimizing the database. Now, my understanding is you're not a DBA by trade. You're a developer.
No,
I
but
mean,
I
we've
have been
talked.
doing MySQL since I was in high school. I
Okay,
mean,
so you're your own DBA.
yes, I am.
Okay, how are you finding that? Because a common question we get here is when to bring in a DBA.
I would love to bring a DBA in any single day that I can find someone who's willing to
Okay.
come and be part of the team. However, we are using Amazon's RDS, which is their hosted
Okay.
MySQL, whatever. And I just basically set it to do backups every day, and I just let it go. And I haven't had any issues with it. That being said, as we start to grow with scale and things like that, I'm either going to need to set up my own replication or use a hosted replication service. And actually, if you don't mind, this brings up a really good point. One of the things that we've done here at Join Me is we've tried to put everything in the cloud, or everything, take as much
Yeah.
responsibility away from us as possible. Because anything that we can pay money for now that doesn't take man hours helps us get to VC closer, right? So we had some initial money, and basically we've been spending that on software as a service, including we're using Google Apps for Gmail, right? Who would run
Sure.
their own email server? You have
Oh,
to
I
be
know. I use Google
to
Apps,
run.
and
Okay,
yeah,
right. But Microsoft does because they're big enough to
sure.
now get the cost savings from running their own stuff. So putting our database in Amazon, it might be more expensive today, but it saves me so many hours and hassle. And I'm kind of a guy, I just want to get it done. Like I'm not going to screw around configuring and optimizing a VM so I can run MySQL when I can pay someone to do it for fairly cheap. So
Sure. Now, I mean, yeah, I'm actually moving a number of things to the cloud for the same reason. I just can't keep dealing with updating software packages
exactly right.
that
It's a pain in the ass.
they're not even relevant to what I'm doing, in particular PHP, but I keep having to keep it up to date because of security risk. Now, at some point, though, at some scale, I mean, EC2 gets expensive.
It's true. It does.
So do you have an exit strategy, or are you going to worry about that later?
So
Okay.
we are not relying on them for anything that we can't do ourselves.
Okay.
So I don't have like a Puppet script, or I don't have a Salt script to be able to make VMs from scratch. But I have documentation for everything that I do, so I can rebuild my VMs. I do it by hand, but I can do it at a moment's notice, which means I can put anywhere I can run Ubuntu, I can run
Sure.
software
You
stack.
can run your stuff, because that's something that I see a lot, actually. You know, especially with things like Amazon or even Heroku. It's great when you're starting, but as you scale, it becomes really not cost efficient.
Yeah, I advise my clients, you can start there, and you can also use it for emergency offloading, but don't use it for your primary once you're actually busy. But I think, in Ben's case, I can't imagine the load's very high right now, right?
No,
Well,
we're
and
not.
he has, yeah, and I mean, when you're just starting out and there's only, you have what, 10 developers, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so the maintenance time on a full server is probably prohibitive. I would guess. You could tell me if I'm wrong.
I mean, yeah. So I mean, I have a RAID set up in my closet at home. I have a Type 1 VM system where I run all my VMs for my own personal use, and it's a whole pain in the ass, right? I'm not going to put my company's thing on something that's I have to maintain the hard drives, and I have to make sure the uptime is good, and blah blah blah. It's a whole pain in the butt. And you're right. There's this whole kerfuffle about, oh, it's raining in the cloud today, Amazon's down, something like that, right? But I mean, like you've said before on this show, the uptime you're going to get by paying for Amazon is way better.
Yeah.
Far better. Way better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I know there's a lot of backlash against the cloud, but if you're a small dev shop, a small startup, I can administrate a server, and you can, but I have a feeling Chris would be better than either of us because he's by trade an admin.
I think that's totally right. Exactly.
So
and
I would rather not do it. Yeah.
Exactly right. And if I can get something hosted, or it's a much better choice. Okay, I think we've made our point. So what's next?
So, is there anything else you want to talk about? I mean, you had fundraising in here, but I think you covered it in equity.
I did. I want to talk a little bit about the virality constant. This is something that's involved when you sort of have a social network or any sort of something that is able to be shared easily. The virality constant is basically measuring for how many people that sign up to your app, how many additional people will sign up as a result of that person. So it's measured, anything below one person, it means you're not growing. So your virality constant of 0.8, so for every one person, you get 0.8 people in addition. But once you get that constant above 1.0, right, then you have supposedly viral growth because the curves start to go up because for every person, it's explosive, et cetera. And I wanted to talk about, the fact that just because your virality constant is below 1.0, it's not a horrible thing. Right? Because let's say you are doing Google AdWords and you buy 1,000 users, you buy clicks of 1,000 users, right? If your virality constant is at 0.8, that actually means you're going to get, 80% more users than those 1,000 clicks. You're going to get 1,800 clicks as opposed to just 1,000 clicks because of this sort of nature of the spreading of your, your idea or your startup or whatever. And this is, again, a lean startup concept. I just wanted to sort of bring that up and let you think about that. Yeah.
Now let's talk about my favorite buzzword, the pivot.
Okay. So
you haven't pivoted yet, to my knowledge.
No, we haven't pivoted. Okay. The pivot comes from the idea, it's sort of a basketball term where you have one foot on the ground and you're spinning on that foot. Your other foot is freewheeling. And the idea is you keep one foot base firm in your core assumptions and your core company values, and then you're changing sort of your direction or your business model. So for Join Me, we are trying to look at organizations there's organizations that run 5K marathons and things like that, and we're trying to target those communities as well as individuals, and we would like to give them something they can put on their website and use our technology. And a pivot for us might be that we would go straight to software as a service. So no longer do we have an app. Now we just have an API that you can send blasts out to Twitter, Facebook, emails, SMS, right? We could change we still want to connect people, but now we're doing it through a different way because now we're allowing developers to use us to connect that own developers network as opposed to, us going directly to the individual.
So that's really interesting. So you would turn it, so theoretically the business would actually be the API portal.
Right. And that's something that we want to do, but that's not our main goal. Our main goal is
Right.
to sell an app, right? We're not looking to white label or anything like that. And another thing that's interesting is that when you pivot, usually you have the same sort of virality or engine of growth. Like you're still growing the same way. It's kind of rare that you would pivot and grow a different way.
Right.
But when you pivot, it's a different, it's like a different area. And in the book, the author, his name is Eric Ries. He says that a company should have a pivot or persevere meeting every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, you should sit down and say, should we pivot or should we keep going in the same direction we're going? And I think that's really extreme, but it's interesting to think about.
Okay. Now we've covered a lot in the book. We've covered a lot of the principles. And let's be honest. How well has it worked for you? I mean, do you feel like you would follow this if you had another startup venture?
I do, and I think
Okay.
that this is my first startup, and this is like a new chapter in my life. Like I was not really an entrepreneur before this.
Right.
I'm 26 years old. I graduated school. I worked a normal job for 4 years, and then now it's this, and it's so amazing. It's like honestly, every day I wake up, I'm just happy to be alive, and I'm amazed that I'm not exactly providing jobs per se, but I mean I'm on my way to becoming a job provider or a job creator, right? I have all these I get to play with technology. If I think of a new database I want to play with, literally I can install it and pay myself to install it and mess around just like Chris would mess around with the new distro and pays himself because he can review it on last. It's so
Right.
cool to be, to work for yourself. It's an amazing thing. And to answer your question directly, yes, I would still use the same principles from the book. Basically because why would you work on something that, does not going to be used by anyone? Why would you spend all that work and release it and no one downloads it, right?
Right. So far the book has been fairly helpful to you.
Yes, I think so. Yes, and I would recommend it to you to read just for your nightly read or whatever.
Yeah, I could definitely take a look. So I have to ask. Now, you feel free not to answer me.
Of course.
Has there been any? What would you say? So in my business, and I think Chris can tell you, there is a dark side. There's a
Yeah.
dark side, and
Yeah.
for us, it's clients not necessarily paying on time.
Right.
Yeah.
So my dark
What
side
would be yours? Yeah,
is 12-hour days certainly is
sure.
but sure. But also it's the management and it's the issues that come up when you are having, there's source control issues and like Chris was talking about on TechSnap, source control is something that you absolutely need to know. And I'm actually very disappointed with the institutions in this country for not teaching source control and not
Speak it, preacher. Speak it.
first class that you take.
Yeah.
Because source control can even apply to a Word document. I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
you could use it for anything. But I mean, there's been a dark side as far as I might have like a good personality, but I maybe have issues with management just because maybe I have control issues over the stack or someone's writing code that I don't approve of or whatever. But I have to sort of like release some of that, and it's hard because when you're a startup and you're just one person, it's easy because you can do everything. Oh, I know this, I know that. But when
Right.
you begin to bring on other people, the mind share, it's not all in your mind anymore. It's in someone else's mind. And it's a big problem moving from just one mind to multiple. And a lot of times you'll hire people you'll have to hire people that are like you. And my old boss, who was an entrepreneur, a little bit of himself, he was telling me, he said, don't look for people that are you, look for people that are a part of you or that can do as much or some of what you can do. You don't have to find someone that's absolutely amazing that can do everything that you can do. And that's the dark side, is trying to sort of figure that out.
Great. And just one more follow-up. You mentioned basically code quality. Do you do code reviews?
I do commit reviews. I'm the
Okay.
commit master for all of the repos except for one. So I basically we have a branching. We're using an issue tracking software, and each issue has a number, and so we number the branches off of the issues. So if you want to know what was going on, you have an entire, honestly, like a forum post from that one number to know what was going on with this issue. And then we have like a dev branch and a production branch, and then I do merge. I do code reviews, and I do merge in, and then we have had some people doing QA for us as well. So yes.
Okay, great. Yeah.
It's been an amazing experience. So it's really cool.
Well, there you go. Wow. So is
There you
that Ben? Is there anything else you want to cover?
Well, you guys want to talk about the tool of the week? I don't know if that's interesting to you.
Yeah, you bet it is. Now,
I love Git tools.
do you, of course, now, Mr. Dominic, isn't this sort of a competitor to CodeJournal?
Actually, no, in no way, shape, or form.
All right, tell us about it.
So this tool is called Tortoise Git. It is an open source Git GUI for Windows. And I'm actually sort of fallen in love with Tortoise Git. I refuse to merge code if I'm not on Tortoise Git. I will not do it.
Really? What do you love about it so much?
Well, it's very nice because it integrates into Windows. Right-click contextual menu. One of the things when the developers were designing the Tortoise line is they said most Git programs fail because they try to build their own version of Windows Explorer. Because source control is dealing with files, et cetera, et cetera. So they basically hooked into Windows, which does file management, relatively well, and they just focus on the Git part. And it's a little bit tricky to set up, but it's an amazing tool. And the other thing that I really like about it is that it integrates into WinMerge. If you're familiar with the program WinMerge, it's a tool pick of the week. If you set them both up correctly, it visually highlights the changes in the lines. You can see exactly what characters are not are the same or different or whatever. You can revert changes individually before you commit. And I'm a big stickler about that. If someone is changing white space in a file and there's no reason to change that white space, I just reject that. I don't reject the commit. I fix it for them without telling them, and then I yell at them later.
No, he doesn't have any control problems.
No control problems whatsoever. The problem with the white space, though, Chris, is that if you're reviewing your source code later, let's say like 1 year later, you're looking through all the changes, lines will show up as yellow, like, oh, this line has been changed.
Oh, I do hate that.
But it's just white. It's just white space.
Yeah,
right?
I see that. Of course, because I use I'm not as geeky as you guys, but I use it. That's how I do my file management, and I will go and bring it through diff programs, and I hate it when you see stuff like that, or any kind of inconsistencies like that. Okay, I understand. I don't mock you, sir.
Oh, that's actually a peeve of mine. Yeah, don't just move spaces.
Yeah. Well, so it's Tortoise Git, and it's code.google.com/p/Tortoise Git, or you know what? Easier, just click the link in the show notes.
Yeah,
go to the show notes, guys. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, the show notes is on JupiterBroadcasting.com. I know you guys ask a lot about that, but just go straight to Jupiter.
Look at him.
That's what the show notes are.
What? Am I predictable now? Is this what it is? Have I? Jeez. All right. Well, Ben, excellent chat. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been a very interesting perspective, and you really helped me better understand the way the startup funding model works.
Thank you very much. So the website is joynme.com, and you can go ahead and follow us on Twitter at JoinMe. You can also follow me on Twitter. My name is at Benathon. Like, think of hackathon or something like that, and just put Ben instead. And thank you guys so much for having me on. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben.
Nice
You bet.
you.
Yeah. Mr. Dominic, what about you? Where can people get a hold of you throughout the week?
You can find me on app.net and Twitter at Dumanuco. You can find me on Google Plus at my name. And that's it. You can go to CodeJournalApp.com. You'll have fun.
Definitely. And of course, you can follow me. I'm on Twitter, of course. Chris LAS. I think most people know that. I'm on Google Plus. Search for Chris Fisher. We'll have links in the show notes for that stuff. I encourage you to join us live on Mondays, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern at jblive.tv for the video or jblive.info for the audio. And of course, then Coder Radio is released later Mondays over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning to this week's episode of Coder Radio. See you right back here next week.